Welcome to Penn Jen's Inkwell podcast. My name is Jen Waters. I hope you enjoy my stories. The Dilemmas of Daisy Dimple was inspired by my brother, Andy. I was always the little Dutch girl with pigtails and a dimple who was relatively boring and sat in the back of the class and never got sent to the principal's office. On the other hand, my dad's nickname for Andy was Buster, so I made up a character named Lil Boy Buster in his honor. Born 3 years after me on the calendar, my brother was always hyperactive. I was turning 3 years old when Andy was born, and I was attempting to have my own birthday party, but he interrupted it. I was born July 26th, and he was born July 24th. I think my mom made a cake and left it for me when she was in the hospital giving birth. I remember sitting in a circle in the kitchen with the old orange checkered carpet for a game of Duck, Duck, Goose, having a birthday party with a neighbor because my mom was still in the hospital with my brother. In my mother's absence, my neighbor cooked me dinner. I remember the green plastic divided plate with tinfoil covering it and eating green beans. At the time, I was not a fan of green beans. Then, my maternal grandparents came over and made me eat again. I remember looking at a jar of homemade soup sitting on the kitchen table, thinking that I had already eaten, and why did I need to eat again? I think they also tried to make me eat grilled cheese with it for a second dinner, but this was better than if my dad made grilled cheese because he always burned it. Since Andy had more energy than most children, he was always climbing out of the crib when he was young. I remember one day when my mom went out for the afternoon with her friend and left my brother and me with my dad. And my brother got a bloody nose climbing out of the crib. Once on a different day, he also pulled the entire wall socket out of the wall with the wires from behind the chair in the living room. I remember my dad coming home from work, looking at the wall saying, "What in the world happened? How did he do this?" My brother was always over-energized and into some mischief. Another time, I remember Andy fell from the tree outside my bedroom window, and he hit his head on the large rock. There was a large rock underneath the giant tree outside my bedroom window, and I used to like to sit on it and read. But Andy climbed the tree, and the branch broke, and he fell and hit his head on the rock. I remember that my mom was concerned that he might have a concussion, but I think he only needed stitches. My mom tried avoiding giving Andy food with red food coloring or preservatives, but I'm not sure it really helped. Andy also played every sport imaginable: t-ball, baseball, basketball, soccer, swimming. My dad loved to play basketball with my brother. I would play the piano constantly, and I don't think anyone ever appreciated my piano playing. But as Andy got older, my brother and I both joined the swim team, but I never formally played basketball, although I was always good at foul shots. I had one season of playing softball, but it wasn't for me because I don't think I crossed home plate the entire season. One time, I remember hearing about how the old gray Saturn car that our family had was parked at a baseball game in Hershey by my brother, and he forgot to put on the parking brake, and it drifted down the hill into the baseball fence during the game. Oh well, fortunately or unfortunately, I wasn't there for that experience. I also remember hearing about how my mom was so proud of my brother when his friend got beat up at the Hershey Park Arena for something, and my brother came to his rescue, and he helped him fight the other people off. I remember wondering how Andy and his friend got themselves into that dilemma. Later, because of our swimming background, my brother and I were both lifeguards. If someone had been drowning at the Cocoa Avenue Plaza pool, I probably would have saved the person. Andy would have stood there in his red shorts, swinging his whistle, and watched me save the dying soul. I think he might have thought he was starring on an episode of Baywatch or something. To top it off, sometimes my parents would let my brother have group sleepovers in the basement in high school. I always hid in my bedroom wondering what was going on in the basement in the backyard tent. So somehow or another, Daisy Dimple's largest dilemma seemed to be Buster, or my largest dilemma has been my brother. Growing up, our bedroom walls were back to back, and we would each play music at the same time on our stereos. My musical tastes were very much different than his were. I remember being shocked the day I heard him play Every Grain of Sand by Bob Dylan, and I thought, wow, he is finally playing a good song. Thank God that he discovered Bob Dylan. So this story is lovingly dedicated to Andy. Today, after attending Randolph-Macon College and Virginia Commonwealth University, my brother Andy works in finance and business, and he is married to Mary Dibble Waters and lives in Richmond with his 3 children, Kate, Connor, and Ethan. The Dilemmas of Daisy Dimple could be adapted into a TV or streaming series with sequels like Roald Dahl stories such as Matilda. Recently, after I saw Charlie Mackessy's The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, which was a picture book produced into a beautiful film that won the Oscar for Best Animated Short Film, I thought that most of my short stories and rhyming poems on Pen Gen's Inkwell podcast could also be published and produced like his work, page, stage, and screen. Now here is The Dilemmas of Daisy Dimple, scored to Buster Buster by Eric Baines. My name is Daisy Dimple, announced the 10-year-old girl who turned parking lots and sidewalks into gardens in the small town of Primrose. She loved the fragrance and beauty of flowers so much that all she could do was smile. I make flowers and smiles spring up in the most unusual places. You're just crazy, Daisy, bullied her 13-year-old brother Billy. He was jealous of her daisies and her magic hypnotizing dimple that caused people to do what she wanted when she smiled. I hate your daisies, Billy threatened, smashing her latest batch of flourishing flowers that grew through cracks in the ground. The white petals floated to the concrete sidewalk in bits. You're the crazy one, Lil Boy Buster, Daisy replied, scattering more flower seeds in the trail around her neighborhood. You stick your finger in electric wall sockets for the thrill of the little buzz, and then you try to shock people. You're going to electrocute yourself and hurt someone else. With that, Little Boy Buster ran himself into Daisy, slinging her onto his shoulders. He had enough electricity in his body from the latest wall socket charging that Daisy's hair frizzed. Beating me up is very small of you, Daisy yelled as her bangs crackled. I'm using you for tackling practice, Buster joked, throwing Daisy to the grassy ground. She always had bruises from his bullying, but he claimed it was her fault because her flowers made him sneeze. Achoo! I'm allergic to you and your petals, he taunted. Laying in pain on the ground, Daisy wished that she had enough courage to stand up to him once and for all. But Daisy was too nice to people and always tried to help them with their problems. Lil Boy heartily ran into her family garage, laughing to himself and slamming the side door. Days later, after seeing all Daisy's bruises, Grandpa Blum came up with a plan to help her look good to the neighborhood friends, who could keep Buster from attacking her again. Could you build me a garden for my 4th of July party? Grandpa Blum asked her with a daisy sticking from his ear. Your flowers are so beautiful, and I need a garden for my party. I'll pay you a bunch for it. I would love to build you a great and grand garden, Daisy cheered, shining her glorious dimple at Grandpa Blum. My earnings can go toward the end of summer class field trip. It's a day at the beach, so I can get away from Buster. The next morning, Daisy started planting flowers along the fence in Grandpa Blum's backyard. At first, Daisy was unsure that she could complete such a large task. This might be a bigger job than I thought, Daisy sighed, looking at the rest of the empty space that needed flowers. I am confident that you can finish the garden in time, Grandpa encouraged her. I secretly want to prove Lil Boy Buster wrong. You are definitely not crazy, Daisy. While landscaping Grandpa Blum's yard, Daisy branched out beyond daisies with many different flowers, such as roses, irises, orchids, tulips, daffodils, buttercups, sunflowers, carnations, and poppies. I'm almost done. Daisy collapsed in the garden next to a tulip. I'm going to have to work through the night. Finally, 2 days before the party, she finished the garden. Oh, you think you're so savvy, Little Boy Buster hollered, jumping over the backyard fence out of nowhere. Crazy Daisy went crazy again, planting more flowers that she knows how to keep alive. "Get out of here, Buster," Daisy wailed. "Grandpa is going to find out if you cause any problems." Despite Buster's threats, Daisy was so happy with the garden. "I think I'd like to live here," Daisy delighted, watching Buster run away. "See you for the garden party on Saturday, Daisy," Grandpa reminded, kissing her on the cheek. He walked out of the garage as Buster disappeared. "I'm so proud of all your hard work. Give these to your mother," Grandpa heartened, handing her a bouquet of flowers. Daisy walked down the sidewalk, scattering seeds as she made her way back home for the evening. "I'm gonna get her," Buster threatened, looping back around Grandpa Blum's house. "You might as well say I'm a bulldozer." Overnight, Buster found the garden hose and stretched it into the middle of Daisy's flower haven. He turned the hose on high and let the water run until a large pond took over the garden. Then Buster unleashed a cage of rodents to eat any leftover flowers. "Go get him," Little Boy whispered, opening the cage door into the garden. For a finishing touch, Buster sent an electric shockwave through the soil, sure to kill the roots of the flowers. "Take that," the brat cried as he zapped the entire garden with electricity. In the morning, Grandpa Blum stood in shock at what had happened to his beautiful garden. "It looks like there was a bad storm," he lamented, but then gazed at the neighbors' backyards, realizing that their gardens were intact. "Only Lil Boy Buster would do this to Daisy," he concluded, noticing the muddy footprints the size of Little Boy Buster's on the patio. "How do you prove it was Buster?" "What in the world happened?" Daisy cried, looking at the mess and throwing a handful of flower seeds into the air. Even her magic Dimple was not enough to fix the mess. "We could still rebuild in time for the party," Daisy insisted, as rodents scurried past her feet with flowers in their mouths. "Buster did this. He is the worst brother in the whole world. What is wrong with him?" "I'll help you go to the local garden store for new flowers," Grandpa Blum said, grabbing his jacket and hat from the garage. He started up his green truck and he and Daisy set off for more flowers. This is just one more life lesson that we didn't know we needed. A lesson in how to plant as many flowers as possible, Daisy quipped, almost remembering the power of her dimple. Upon returning with more flowers to plant, Daisy set traps for the rodents and leveled the ground with new fertilizer. One by one, she planted the new flowers in the garden. As the stars came out for the night, Daisy stayed up until the morning, planting flowers and keeping watch over the backyard, hoping to catch Little Boy Buster, but he never returned. "If you want to sleep out here, it's fine with me," Grandpa Blum said, "but at least use a sleeping bag." He unrolled a blue comfy bag with a flashlight tucked into it. The next morning, Daisy planted more flowers right up until the party, but she still wasn't done. "Could you help me plant these flowers?" Daisy asked each of the neighbors as they arrived until the garden was finished. Her magic dimple made each of them say yes. "Maybe we could hire you to plant a garden for us?" the neighbors asked, wanting to hire Daisy to build the masterpieces of their own. Then, without warning, Daisy spotted Little Boy Buster with a water gun strapped around his body and the garden hose in his hands. "Don't even think about it," Daisy yelped, wrestling him to the ground and planting a flower on his head before he could shock her with an electric bolt. As Daisy flashed her dimple, the flower took root and Buster could not pull it out of his head. "That will teach you," Daisy snapped. "Ah!" he screamed,
running from his sister in fear. "What happened to my head? Someone pull this flower out of my head!" Despite Buster's effort to remove the flower from his head, he could not expel it. "It's gonna cause me brain damage!" Buster screeched. "I can feel its roots!" Later, when Daisy's parents saw the wonderful garden in Grandpa Blum's backyard, they were upset at Lil Boy Buster's tirade.
Buster didn't get away with his bad behavior this time. Mr. Dimple chided. "I saw the flower Daisy planted in his head. Oh well, he can't browbeat her anymore. I guess the flower will stay there until the seasons change."
"I'm not sure what to do about the flower," Mrs. Dimple commented. "Daisy, how long do you think the flower will stay in his head?" "I'm not sure, Mom," Daisy answered. "I just planted it like everything else."
"Can you make our backyard into a beautiful paradise as well?" her dad asked.
"Sure, Dad. I'll start tomorrow," Daisy agreed, shining her famous dimple at him.
"Lil Boy Buster can no longer call Daisy crazy,"
Grandpa urged, looking at both of Daisy's parents.
"It's not nice to call people nasty names."
"Daisy has never been crazy," her father agreed. "She's just enthusiastic about planting flowers," her mom reassured. "Maybe Buster can replant the flower from his head in Grandpa's garden instead of destroying it," Daisy wondered, not knowing that Buster heard her as he hid behind the shrubs in the backyard. Having a momentary change of heart toward Daisy, where he felt electric tingles everywhere, Lil Boy Buster removed the growth from his head and planted the awkward flower in Grandpa Blum's garden. "I'm free of her stupid flower!" Buster groaned. Roots and all, the flower stood tall in his grandfather's soil, and Buster slumped off in defeat. However, his momentary remorse did not last for long. "I'm gonna get back at Crazy Daisy for what she did to me. She planted a flower in my head, and it still hurts," he vowed. "I'm so glad I finally stood up to Buster," Daisy relished in victory. "He is only my little bitty brother. He's not gonna torment me anymore."
"The garden party is a huge success,"
Grandpa Blum triumphed. "I'll have more than enough money for my class field trip," Daisy told her grandfather with gratitude. "I'm going to donate the rest of the money to planting a garden at the local community center. Flowers need to take over the world."
This has been Pen Gen's Inkwell Podcast. I wrote and performed all the original stories in the podcast. This podcast is produced by Eric Baines, who scored all the stories and poems in the series to original and public domain music. The podcast is associated with my blog of the same name, Pen Gen's Inkwell, which can be found on my website, jenwaters.com.